Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to a BIA webinar, a review of document review. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded, Tuesday, August 20th, 2013. I would now like to turn the conference over to Robin Thompson. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robin Thompson, and on behalf of the team here at BIA, we'd like to welcome you to our Knowledge Leadership webinar, where our experts will be doing a review of document review. I'd like to ask two favors of you. One is if you have questions for our panelists, please submit those through the chat window, and we'll answer those at the end of the program. And number two, as you exit the program today, you'll be prompted to answer a short survey. We take these survey responses to plan our educational curriculum for the remainder of the year and the beginning of next year, and to improve the services that we provide to the community. Now to the favorite part of today's program, my privilege to introduce our panelists. If I were to spend the time necessary to go through their vitaes, I would consume the entirety of the program, so I'm going to abbreviate their backgrounds for you today. Barry Schwartz is a licensed attorney with over 32 years of legal and business consulting management experience. He is VP of Advisory Services for BIA and works with a wide variety of information management areas, including litigation and discovery, document retention and management, regulatory, and IT security. He also carries the distinguishment of SED certification. Lisa Prowse is an attorney who has nearly 30 years of computer experience, which includes more than 16 years of database design and management. She has more than 6 years working in e-discovery. Not only does Lisa carry the distinguishment of the SED certification, but she sits on the SED certification exam committee, which reviews and updates testing to meet developing standards, best practices, and case law. Rounding out our panel of attorneys is Colin O'Neill, who leads the development of BIA's Managed Review Services. Colin is a former litigator and spent several years assembling and managing review teams in complex litigation. It is now my privilege to turn the program over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. Let me begin with a brief overview of the history of document review in the near-term history. In the early 2000s and earlier, a large portion of document review was paper review, using colored slip sheets, green for responsive, blue for not responsive, red for privilege, and hence if you have an attorney group who wants to see privilege terms highlighted in red, it comes from that red slip sheet. Additionally, online review can be broken into like 3 areas of types of review that happen early on in the document review process. There is non-managed review, where essentially a group of attorneys, typically contract attorneys, were thrown at a project, left to their own devices, and would finish when they finished, and there would be a minimal amount of QC or second review. Later on in the continuum of document review, there was found the need to add some project management, with the expectation of review rates established, accountability for the reviewers in terms of accuracy, and as in terms of whether or not they are spending the appropriate amount of time on the project, as well as paying attention to the details of the documents at hand. And typically, the early online reviews, and even to this day, many are conducted in a linear fashion, starting at the beginning of the document collection and ending at the end. And these linear reviews are typically done on a custodian-by-custodian basis, and in many instances are done simply in the priority of the availability of the documents when they're loaded to any given review tool. And in linear reviews, it's unlikely that the documents are organized in any specified sequence. And as we move on to the state of document review today, there is an emphasis to have a very managed process. that incorporates a detailed workflow, an organized QC review and second review and a third review if needed, a structured privilege review, an understanding of the confidentiality aspects of document sets, because confidential documents aren't available to the general public, and there's an effort to have an intelligent assignment of the documents, maybe by subject matter, maybe by date, or by priority of custodians based on deposition schedules, perhaps. Additionally, with the current state of document review, there's a strong emphasis on having a qualified project management person involved with each document review effort in order to accomplish several things. First and foremost is to keep outside counsel and the ultimate client informed on the process and the progress of the project. The project manager is responsible for keeping all parts of the project moving, including data collection and processing, without which there'd be no documents to review. Also, there is emphasis in loading the documents to the review platform in an organized fashion so that the documents can be reviewed by the team in a structured fashion based on the topical interests at hand. And then lastly, the project manager is one that assists in the production of documents out to opposing counsel or the regulatory agency. And we also have here a discussion of technology-assisted review. And we're not going to discuss seed sets or sampling or anything of that sort, but I'm going to ask Lisa to step in and discuss how TAR, or technology-assisted review, is used in the current scheme of document review. Lisa?
Thanks. And this will be really brief because obviously that topic alone can be its own webinar. But technology-assisted review, also known as computer-assisted review, some people just throw predictive coding into it. Basically, all of them are talking about using the normal type of review, which is humans, and supplementing it or substituting it with computers. You've got some companies who are going completely with computers, where basically you have the attorneys who will create a seed set and just code a small sampling of the documents, and then let the computer, the algorithm, code the rest of the documents, and then just go from there. And then you've got another model, called like a hybrid model, which I'm definitely more partial to, which is you've got the humans working in conjunction with the computer or with the technology, feeding each other back and forth, and really just using the technology to aid the humans to be able to be faster and more accurate. And with that, we can turn it over to Colin.
Lisa, thanks. Hello, everybody. Before I get into review team composition, just a little bit of way background, because the history of doc review is kind of how it flowed along the way. Initially, I think it was handled by associates, and then in the mid-90s, staffing agencies got involved in providing temporary or contract attorneys to assist in the review process. A few years after that, managed review providers, both domestic and offshore, got involved in providing solutions to corporations and law firm clients. And also around that time, bigger firms started bringing staff attorneys who would not be in the associate to partner track, but would be brought in as full-time employees to work and conduct conjunction use with document review. That way of background, I thought I'd jump into with the review team composition. There's different approaches to working with different groups. Initially, talking about using contract attorneys, the upside back in the day was brought up. One was, from the law firm perspective, bringing in a contract attorney avoiding any kind of a liability for employment issues such as workers' comp or unemployment. Also, the flexible approach of saying I can add to or reduce the team as needed was helpful, and also the foreign language capability. One more thing that was eventually brought into the sphere of that was review space. At the beginning, I think review space was an offer, but as time went on, providers of staffing agencies would offer review space, so the review could be done not at the law firm, but actually at the provider from the agency perspective. Some negatives that do come up are retention. Oftentimes the nature of this business on the temporary side would be that if a better opportunity arose, such as higher cost or a longer-term project, folks might leave the project and look to go to the next one. That often took place at the end of a review, and the challenge there is you have deadlines, you're ready to go forward, and have people leave your project. Oftentimes you've learned a lot about the case over the course of reviewing documents for 10, 12 hours a day for weeks, if not months at a time. And also, of course, the issue of the incentivization of the review team. If it's an hourly model, the reviewers are really not incentivized in the sense of the productivity and accuracy. They're asked to do what they're asked to do, and they'll do just that. Jumping forward, if I could. We're looking at with firm associates or staff attorneys, some benefits, of course. They're vetted and trained by the law firm, so that is a selling point. And also, they're incentivized to be accurate, and that they're full-time employees working for the firm. And also, they oftentimes have subject matter about the case itself, which I did mention for contract attorneys, but sometimes what happens is you're bringing people in to work on a project who've got no real knowledge of the matter. It could be a bankruptcy matter. They really have no background in regards to that. That's sometimes the challenge. But with the associate staff attorneys, you often have that not be the case. Of course, there's some downsides to that as well, and one, of course, is the cost, and that's why the first temporary model came in place. I think is because the cost associated with using associates or staff attorneys to do the document review itself, and also the nature of being an associate is that you've got obligations beyond just doing document review, and staff attorneys as well. So they often cannot dedicate themselves full time to doing the review. They have other things to take care of for the parts of the case to be involved with. And of course, efficiencies of the platform. Oftentimes, they use different platforms different times, so it's ramping up and not knowing ways to search and things of that nature. One of the things that comes up is the morale, and that was part of the staff training program brought in was to try and because associates, oftentimes didn't want to get involved in spending their days doing the doc review process. The hourly model is the prevailing model for associates conducting review or staff attorneys, and that also allows for lack of cost certainty in the course of a review. And again, foreign language, unless the associates have that foreign language skill, but for a large-scale matter, foreign language can be a challenge, as well as space constraints, because most firms don't have room to have a team of attorneys reviewing. And also towards that end too is that oftentimes when you have associates doing the review, they're doing it in their own office, not in working alongside a bunch of reviewers, which kind of sometimes the benefit of having a bunch of reviewers together is you get the knowledge shared amongst them, which is not the case if they're in individual rooms. We're looking at review companies with employed attorney reviewers, and that could be both onshore or offshore. There's some benefits. Obviously, low cost is a benefit that we can discuss. And the same things that help with contract attorneys is the flexibility, to expand or reduce the team, and also team efficiencies and the fact that you have a team dedicated to doing that. They get very well versed in doing document review, understand the efficiencies of the review platform, and actually, as a result, because they've spent so much time doing it, are familiar with the review process and can really greatly accelerate their speed. Similar to the staff attorneys, they're vetted and trained by the company, familiar with review platforms, dedicated full-time to the review of documents. They're not dedicated to other parts of it, so they can focus upon the review itself. And they're experienced at mentioning with subject matter oftentimes because they're full-time employees. They ask to do similar reviews time and again. The review site also is helpful in the sense most of the managed review providers set up dedicated review centers that have the capability with bandwidth as well as space and technology to set up and run review processes. The negatives, can be location, both domestically and offshore. Domestic reviews sometimes be done not in the major metropolitan areas where law firms are located, and also for the offshore providers even more so, they might be difficult to do that. The potential for foreign trained attorneys arises in the sense that, if you're doing your review in India or in the Philippines, the attorneys you're working with are not domestically admitted attorneys. And also foreign language challenges exist in the sense that dedicated review teams often don't have set up a team of fluent attorneys in certain languages. Moving forward to the location, I've had the benefit of setting up review facilities, domestically nearshoring. I mean, in the city itself, New York City area particularly, as well as nearshoring it in the States, and also spent some time with the joint venture in the LPO industry and spent some time in India back several years ago. So the benefits of doing it local to law firm, for instance, I'm in New York. If you do it locally in New York, is the associates can come by oftentimes during the entire review, spend time managing the review and answering questions. The people you're retained to do the review, are admitted attorneys. And there's usually a large supply of available contract attorneys to work in a major metropolitan area because a lot of law schools, a lot of available people to work with. The negatives, is depending on location, can be a higher cost. If you conduct a review in New York City versus doing a review in Atlanta, there could be an hourly model, a different cost model. And also, space can be an issue in the sense that it's easier to procure space outside of a New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago than in other places in the United States. Nearshoring, as I mentioned, is taking advantage of lower cost points by doing reviews outside of metropolitan areas in the United States. One of the benefits of that, of course, is lower cost. The cost of living is lower in certain parts of the country than they would be in other areas. And the associates still can conduct the training and can actually remain on site if they're so inclined. And also, they're U.S. admitted attorneys conducting the review. The negatives is oftentimes if you go to a new market to try and set up a nearshoring facility, you don't have quite the volume of available reviewers, and even more so available foreign language reviewers. Offshore, the benefit, as in other models we mentioned thus far, is a cost. But added to that is also the benefit of full-time employees. Most offshore providers will have full-time employees working on the review. The negatives, one, I should mention at the outset here, would be the timing. Oftentimes it's 10, 11 hours ahead of time, which makes it a little more difficult to manage it from the perspective of someone in the States. But also you really usually don't conduct the training live in the sense that you're going to travel to those locations and remain on site. Also, the attorneys are foreign trained attorneys. They're not trained necessarily in U.S. law. There could be just other laws, if you will. Language can be a challenge as well. English might be the primary languages. Certain phrases, certain turn of the tongue we use here in the States might not make sense. And I saw that myself at times. It did register as being what we knew it to be because they're not familiar with the phrases we use over here. Also, they might have a different understanding of privilege that arises sometimes if they're trained in a certain study of law that doesn't have the American view of privilege, and that can be an issue. Retention issues do arise as well. It's a competitive marketplace, and when I was involved in it, people did tend to leave to find other providers, so sometimes it's retention. And also the issue is, of course, the foreign language. Depending where you're doing the review, you might have the benefit of a foreign language, but you might not have the breadth of foreign language capabilities you might need to have on the course of a review. With that being said, my quick little synopsis there, I will hand it over to Lisa.
Thanks. Oh, but there we go. Okay, so basically, once you've decided where you're going to have the review, the next step is setting up a review team. To begin with, you would want to identify the team members that you're going to have on the team and do conflict checks, obviously, for the case. I prefer to use a smaller set of people to begin with and then ramp up if necessary, just because training a lot of people can get kind of messy, and at least if you have a smaller set that's trained and trained well and you do need to ramp up, those people can then teach the new people, and you've got several layers of people helping each other, and it moves more smoothly that way. Once you've got the team set up, then you move into the training mode, the training for the case itself. Typically, big clients like to have an attorney on site to train the review team, which is obviously perfectly acceptable, and we welcome that. But it can also be done, with webinar or with, conference calls, etc. One of the things that we like to do is have the reviewers actually look at the documents for a day before we have outside counsel come out and train them, basically because if we don't, it feels like we've wasted an entire day of having outside counsel teach us a case and then go back and look at the docs, and now we've got a lot of questions because what we were taught isn't really what we're seeing in the docs yet. So that's one of the things that we like to do. The matter background that we like to see when we're training the teams, it's always kind of a tug and push as far as what information we want to get from the client and from outside counsel. Obviously, we don't want all of the minutia about the case. That's not going to help us, and it's going to overburden what we need to know about the case. But at the same time, having the complaint is very helpful. Having the request for production is very helpful, particularly because that's, while we're looking at documents and determining whether they're responsive, the question is, are they responsive to the request for production? So having those requests for production are actually very helpful. Keyword lists, and for example, the search terms that were used to call out the data set, that's always helpful so that we know why we're seeing documents that we're seeing. We usually like to populate a field in the database that has those keywords so that when the reviewer hits that document, while it may look like it has nothing to do with the case, they can at least see what keyword hit on that document and determine whether it was a false hit or whether it's just something they're not understanding. Another big one is, and it's often hard to get because most companies don't really keep this, but a list of acronyms. You would be amazed how many, if you start to read through your own internal work email, you'd be amazed how many shorthands and acronyms and stuff you use that you just make up internally, and everyone knows what you're talking about. But beyond that set of people, nobody has any idea. There have been lots of reviews where we'll review documents, something doesn't look responsive, or it does look responsive, and then several days into it, somebody finds out what the acronym means, and we have to go back and correct all of those documents because now we understand what the document actually meant. Other things that are important, for example, if we have an IP case, getting the information about the patents themselves, any technical points about the patents. If you've got, if it's a matter of there are several patents and one is a matter of the lawsuit and two of them aren't, but they're very similar, just having some sort of cheat sheet that helps us determine how to weed those out so that we're not looking at stuff we don't need to look at and not wasting our time on those. Product liability cases, it's always nice to have the product information. It's always really nice to have, for example, diagrams and pictures of the product themselves. Mainly because we see, with product liability, we tend to see a lot of CAD diagrams and CAD drawings throughout the life cycle of the building of the product, and that is really helpful for us to be able to see, particularly because with product liability, a lot of these products don't have the end product name in the beginning. Usually they have project names, and project names is another one that I would stick up on that keyword list. If we're looking for product ABC, but 3 years ago it was Project Champagne, then it's really helpful to know Project Champagne. Let's see. The next part would be having the reviewers properly trained on the review tool. When we use contract attorneys, that's always a struggle, just because they're not used to working in that program all the time. Our reviewers, are in Relativity, Catalyst, other programs every day, so all the quirks and stuff are known to them, and they're just used to them. We spend a lot of our time actually taking calls from outside counsel who aren't used to the review tool, and easily can chew up 2-3 hours of outside counsel's day just trying to figure out how to get to the documents that they want to get to, how to run simple searches. And it's not that outside counsel is not smart, and it's not that the review tool is too difficult. It's just that they're not used to using that program. And And obviously that takes a lot of time away from review, which is expensive on on the client's part. So it's really helpful if you've got a team who understands that platform. After you've got your team assembled, then you would go into your workflow. First of all, you would talking with client and outside counsel, you would determine what their review priorities are. Sometimes it's just going to be, here are all the documents, we just need them reviewed. Go ahead and review them by custodian or by topic or by whatever you want, which, that would be great if they always just left it up to me. Rarely does that happen. Sometimes it's a matter of they're already behind the 8 ball. They're looking at sanctions. They're getting in trouble with the court, so they have to get documents out very quickly. When that's the case, then we will often, run targeted searches to find specific responsive documents so that we can start moving responsive documents out very quickly. If it's a matter of they just need to get documents done as quickly as possible to get through them, then we would take another approach. If it's if we've got depositions coming up, they might give us specific custodians that they need reviewed immediately so that they can get the deposition documents out. So it's very helpful for us to have that input from the client and especially from outside counsel for as far as the calendar goes, so that we know what they're looking at, so that we can be right behind them and getting them what they need when they need it. The first review that we would do, once we've established how we're going to review the documents, first review would just be basically like a linear review, since we're not going to talk about technology-assisted review today. And a linear review would basically be looking at document to document. It would be, the entire review team. They would have a supervising attorney both at the review team site, and generally they're in contact with attorneys at outside counsel as well. They go through and they would tag for responsiveness issues, privilege, whatever we need, confidentiality, whatever we need to tag for. Following that, at least with our teams, we go to a second level review or a QC review, where we aren't actually, we're reviewing the reviewers themselves actually. So we go in and we will QC, say 10% of the responsive documents that reviewer A coded, maybe 5% of the non-responsive. Based on those numbers, obviously if reviewer A is doing great and we're not making that many changes, then we would probably leave it at that. Reviewer A is making a lot of mistakes, then we just pull reviewer A aside, explain what the mistakes are that they're making, and we might increase those percentages just to the point where we are seeing enough and we can make sure that we've corrected them appropriately. Potentially privileged documents will typically always get 100% QC, basically because the first line of review is usually, we usually tell them to be very broad with privilege. We don't want to miss privilege. So it tends to be, privilege tends to be over-coded at that point. So we usually have a second review at 100% where we can weed out the stuff that probably isn't privileged. And during that whole process, we perform metrics each day. The metrics, oops, okay, sorry, my screen was flickering. The metrics will depend on the familiarity with the documents, the complexity of the documents, the organization of the document review. Basically, we can tell the clients how fast the review is going, when it should be done, how many documents are being tagged as privileged, how many documents are being tagged as attorney's eyes only, how many privileged documents are being tagged that need redaction, all those kind of metrics, and we can usually break it down by custodian and by reviewer, and a lot of very minute areas that and usually the reviewer or the client can usually go in and click on those reports and see them from themselves every day. It's important to have the proper level of QC, obviously, because there are so many documents and outside counsel doesn't have a chance to look at every single document after we've completed them, which is the entire reason why you have a review team, is so that you don't have to look at all the documents. So having a proper level of QC so that you can catch all of the reviewers and make sure that they're all on the same page and they're all doing things appropriately, it's very important. Along with that, the reviewers usually will have questions throughout the day, and it's important to have a dialogue back and forth each day with the supervising attorney at outside counsel, so that you can shoot them the questions, even if it's just collecting them all and shooting them to them at the end of the day, and having outside counsel answer them and have them ready for the review team the next morning. That helps. It helps keep the review team on track, and it helps to prevent having to go back and correct a lot of stuff later if the review team has gone through 10, 15,000 documents before outside counsel has answered a question that makes the documents look to be tagged a different way. It's always important to have input from the client. Outside counsel is usually who the review team has the most contact with, but at the same time the client is the one ultimately paying the bill. So the client, it's good to bring the client in, make sure that they understand what the review team is doing, what outside counsel is doing, the interaction. If there's any areas where things are being done needlessly, just so that it's wasting money, basically. It's good to have the client in, because otherwise the bill goes out and 2 months later the client calls and they're very angry with you. So having the client involved in all of that is important. Obviously, they've turned it over to outside counsel, so outside counsel makes the decisions for the review and stuff, but having the client involved in that process is important. Another thing that's really important is the privilege review. Obviously, it's extremely important to catch privileged documents. There's a lot of case law lately that basically says that there's no reason not to just use clawbacks. That privilege reviews are a waste of money. That's one thing that I keep hearing. They're a waste of money, and we should just use clawbacks. But as they've said, you can't unring a bell. Once you've produced the privileged document, yes, the other side is supposed to give it back. They're supposed to destroy it, but they've already seen it. So I think it's still really important to catch the privileged documents before they actually go out the door. And it's not as difficult as it seems. It's not as expensive as it seems, and I think that the liability of just relying on clawbacks is probably worse than the cost of the actual privilege review. And it's important to properly categorize the privilege documents for the privilege log. When you put them on the privilege log, you would log whether or not the document is being withheld for attorney-client privilege or for work product privilege. And if you say, for example, you withhold it for attorney-client privilege, and in the columns where it's, the to from CC columns, there are no attorneys present, then the description for that document better have something that explains why you're saying that it's attorney-client privilege when the rest of the line doesn't show anything about an attorney. So that's one of the things that's very helpful to make sure that the team is properly categorizing and writing the descriptions according to the rest of the metadata that's on the line. The overall guiding part for the workflow, at least for us, has been ISO, ISO 9001 certification. it basically provides a consistent, repeatable process and a common system. It's the whole background with ISO is that it's continual improvement, and you've got a repeated process that you can always go back to. And if there's a problem with the process, you fix the process, and it's correct going forward. And with that, we find that we've got much fewer problems with failures in our service. Basically, we've got the entire process is mapped out. Every step is mapped out, even accounting for the bizarrities that can come up during document review. Those are all built into the ISO process. And when we do find an error, or when we do find a place where, oh, we hadn't ever thought of this before, now this needs to get in, there's a process for us to make the change to ISO and to broadcast it out to the reviewers and to the rest of the company, and to make sure that everybody is on the right page. So it's all about being documented and being able to always rely back on that same quality control document set that you've got, to make sure that everything is always going the same way. With that, we find that we have much less errors, and when we do, it's much faster to find them and fix them and move on from them. And with that, we are going to turn it back to Barry for pricing, because I'm not allowed to talk pricing ever.
Thanks, Lisa. We did get a question in, and let me pose the question, and probably back to you, Lisa. How do you recommend that the competency of review team members and supervising attorneys be determined? Lisa, you want to take a stab at that?
The competency, if we're talking about whether or not they're competent to do document review itself or the actual project. If we're talking about document review itself, one of the things when I'm reviewing new reviewers, one of the things I usually ask them is, if outside counsel has told you that you're going to tag documents that say ABC this way, and you see a document and you know that that's not right, what are you going to tag it that way? And the ones that say no, those are usually the ones that I find to be not competent, because at the end of the day, outside counsel still is the boss, and we can make recommendations to them. We can tell them what we're seeing, but if they tell us to code a certain way, then we code a certain way. Beyond that, we look for people who are comfortable with the computer. If I've got somebody who freaks out because their internet went down and they don't know how to get their internet back up, or their Internet Explorer is frozen and they don't know how to Control-Alt-Delete and crash it out of Task Manager, I probably would move on. I stick with people who can get through all those little computer problems that normally would hold somebody up for 15, 20 minutes until somebody can come to their desk. Beyond that, when we're talking about the actual projects, a lot of times we don't need to have really substantial knowledge of the case, just because once you've read 100,000 documents, you have pretty good knowledge of the case. But for patent cases, we usually use a team who has experience in patent work and has experience in reading the technical diagrams and reading the patent office, the really long patent office, brochure, or the printouts from the USPTO, and the one I don't read those anymore, so I don't know. And with product liability, we look people who are used to looking at those kind of documents, and once they're used to looking at those types of documents, even if it's a completely different patent, they still know where to look in, the USPTO documents for the information they're looking for. They know where, if it's an accounting case, they know where to look in the spreadsheets for the information, even if they don't know, even if it's not the same information case over case. They know where to find that information. So that's where we would look for competency, is just, really it comes down to experience. I definitely like experience, and it's hard to get experience because a lot of people view document review as I'm just out of law school, I haven't got a job yet, I'm going to do document review until I can get a job. And that's, we usually don't use those types of reviewers. We have, our team is full-time, has been there for 5 years now, and that's what they do. They do document review, and they like to do document review, at least I think they do. So it makes a big difference that that's their job, that's what they like doing, and that carries over from case to case.
Thanks, Lisa. Let me move on to discussing briefly the pricing models that we see today. The age-old model is the hourly model. The number of hours worked times the bill rate is the amount that is invoiced out to the client, and that has its advantages and drawbacks. And advantages are few in our opinion, and the drawbacks are there's no control over the elapsed time that it takes to complete a review project, and hence the more predictable method of doing document review pricing today is to do it on a per document basis with some modifiers. Typically, we see today document review that is priced on a per document basis for the basic first level review, covering several issues such as confidentiality, potentially privileged, and some matter-specific issues. And then there is also a charge or a cost to perform a second-level QC review that, again, is predictable and on a per-document basis. And then we have a cost associated with doing privileged document review, not the act of determining whether or not a document is privileged, but the act of creating the privilege log. And that can be involved, as Lisa was saying, in order to have the proper descriptors on the privilege log, the reviewers need to know the contents of the issue and the attorney names that are implicated, and that the log entry be drafted clearly and concisely to prevent any challenges. So the costs for doing a privilege log are higher than a straight document review, but they, at a per document rate for logging those documents, is very manageable and very predictable. And the same thing goes for redactions. There can be redactions for any number of issues, from HIPAA to personal identifying information to personal credit information to competitive information that shouldn't be disclosed in a given matter, or the partially privileged documents. And what we see today are pricing models that are reflective of a per-page cost, perhaps. And there are some instances where redactions are done on an hourly basis if we're dealing with multi-thousand-page spreadsheets that need to be redacted in somewhat native fashion so that the information is properly and correctly withheld. And there's no fair way to do that other than to do it on an hourly basis. And then, of course, we see some blended models where part of the review is done on a per document basis and another part is done on the hourly basis. Perhaps the privilege log drafting is hourly, and as I said, the redactions on large documents could be done on an hourly basis. But what we're seeing today is the overall notion that we want to have for our clients a predictable cost model so that they know at the end of the day that given the document set at hand, if it's 20,000 documents or 2 million documents, what their likely overall document review costs are going to be. Now let's move on to concepts of that we're dealing with the attorney certification in terms of what the attorneys, the supervising attorneys in document review, are expected to know and do. And Federal Rule 26G, as we state here, imposes on counsel signing discovery pleadings a duty to make a reasonable inquiry about their accuracy, motivation, and proportionality before signing. Essentially, that means that the person who signs off on the submission of the production per a filed request is comfortable with the contents of that production and has a good understanding of what is contained in that production. And then we have some ABA model rules, Rule 1.1, which addresses the fact that the attorney involved in the matter should be competent, which prints through into all the ethics considerations in the various state bar associations, is that an attorney who is involved with supervising a document review project should understand, as Lisa and Colin were discussing, the nuances of the case, the software that's involved in utilizing performing the document review, that the production has been done clearly and accurately and completely, and that is something that is implicit throughout the entire document review process as far as we're concerned, and the model rules spell out. Rule 5.1b states that a lawyer having direct supervisory authority over another lawyer shall make reasonable efforts to ensure that that other lawyer conforms to the rules of professional conduct. That means, among other things, that contract attorneys, if those are employed, are not talking about the case out of hand, and that they're performing correctly and appropriately. And 5.3b states that a supervisory lawyer must make reasonable efforts to ensure that the contract attorney's conduct is compatible with the professional obligations of the lawyer. And I think that, on its face, is a clear statement. And there are some prominent cases out there that we all may know something about. In the first instance here, JM Manufacturing versus McDermott, Will & Emery, is a case that received a lot of press last year, where the supervising attorneys allowed the contract team of attorneys to review documents, and 3,900 privileged documents were let out the door in a whistleblower case to the detriment of JM Manufacturing, and hence they filed complaint against McDermott. And that was, in our opinion, an egregious error, and it is something that the supervising attorneys should have caught had they been paying any attention to the document review effort. In the Siglia versus Zuckerberg, and that's Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook fame, there was a lack. This is a case of a lack of attorney supervision over the chosen ESI vendor. Plaintiff's attorney did not review the documents before production, and critical privileged documents were produced. As a result of this lack of supervision, the court held that the privilege was waived because, among other things, the attorney did not take reasonable steps to oversee the vendor's activities. And in the Brandhaven case, this is an issue under Rule 26G, where the attorney who involved in supervising the document review effort and the collection of documents did not thoroughly vet the process, and as a result, there were many documents that should have been produced that were not produced, that the opposing side was aware of, and ended up having sanctions and the imposition of having those documents that were omitted from the review and production made available to the other side. And lastly, in the Brookfield Asset case versus AIG, this is an instance, as Lisa was saying, you can't unring the bell, where the ESI vendor in this instance had correctly withheld documents marked for privilege. However, they did not scrub the metadata for the redacted portions of those documents, and as a result, confidential privileged information was released to the other side, and the court held, because there was a 502D clawback stipulation in place, that there was not a waiver of privilege. However, the bell was rung and the information was out, and so be it. And to that point, we're now to the area of questions. And as a follow-up, if you do have any questions that we don't address here or in the future, please direct them to Colin, and his email address is right here for everyone. Thank you.
Can I jump in 1 second and mention that the little typo there, if you actually follow my email address, it's actually C-O-Neil, N-E-I-L-L, not N-I-E-L-L. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions for you all, and thank you for your valuable time. One question came in. To review the documents and use the platform, is there an assessment model to determine competency, or do you just do QC as you move along in the process for any of you?
I can answer that. We have an assessment model as far as we have scripts that are built and random. I can't think of the word. We have a script. Thank you, randomization. Random was as much as I could get out. We have a randomization script that we use, and that kind of gets us going. But from there, we really rely on what we are seeing on the individual reviewers. Years ago, we used to QC the documents themselves, but really, you're never going to be able to find all of the mistakes in a big document review. You'd have to re-review them multiple times. It's much more efficient to find the reviewers who are making the mistakes and just correct the reviewers themselves. And as far as competency on the platform, I know that by how many questions they're asking our tech team, basically.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. Another question, how do you recommend that records be ordered in batches?
This is Barry. I'll take that question. I hate to say the words it depends, but the question is, what is of utmost importance at the time that the batches are being created? We always keep family members together as a general rule, meaning that the email and its attachments follow throughout the process, at least in first review. In secondary reviews, they may be split, particularly for privilege considerations. We might, as Lisa mentioned briefly, with technology-assisted review, or even a shorthand method of that, is group documents by date, by subject line in an email, or what have you, depending on the needs of the particular case. And it all, to be more succinct, it really does depend on the particular fact situation that you're dealing with at the time the batches are being organized.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, like Barry said, my kids always joke that the only answer I ever have is it depends. But it just depends on, if the client comes to us and their foremost problem is that they've got depositions in 2 weeks, then obviously we narrow down on just the documents they're going to need for those depositions. Even if there's another 150,000 that need to be reviewed afterwards for the production itself, we need to get those documents that they need for deposition right away. And it's a lot like that. It's just whatever it is that outside counsel is really looking to get immediately, that's kind of where we will start and work from there.
Perfect. Hang on, I've got one coming up in queue. Barry, is it important that reviewers have a bar admission? And if so, why?
Well, that's an interesting question. Colin was discussing offshore review teams and so forth, but let me address the domestic side of things. In the U.S., barred attorneys have, as I was saying earlier, ethical considerations and ethical obligations, and a review attorney that is a member of a bar signs on to those obligations and expectations. And for domestic review teams, that to us is a very important consideration. And Colin, if you want to address the offshore aspect of that, please.
Sure, Barry. I agree with you that there is great import in having a licensed attorney conduct your review. The offshore model, actually, there's some bar opinions that come down saying that as long as it's being supervised by admitted attorneys, then it's allowable. But I still personally think that it makes sense to have it done by admitted attorneys for the reasons you just raised right now and also during the course of the presentation.
Makes perfect sense. Lisa, here's one for you. Somebody wants to know what your toughest review challenge you've ever faced, and how did you deal with it?
Toughest review challenge usually is just a very tight timeline. There's always the client that calls up and says, it's a really hard case, and there's 500,000 documents after we've called and everything, and it's due 2 weeks from now. Which even the biggest team, it's just a lot of work to get through. And the bigger the team is that you get, the more QC you have, and it just kind of exponentially snowballs to the point where you really can't manage it. One of the things that's really important with us is if you come to us with a problem like that, and it's a tight timeline, and we tell you that we can get it done, let us get it done. Outside counsel, always wants to be right there, over our shoulder and knowing every single aspect. But the more they can let us just do things our way, if we want to highlight the privilege in blue and they want red, please let us do blue, because that just means that we're used to using blue, and we will go through it faster if we use blue. It's small things like that where it's not something that really will affect the case at all, but it just makes our process go quicker if outside counsel can just let us use the process that we've basically that we've built for 5 years, and that we've gotten ISO certified, and we know it works. So just let us use our process, and we promise we'll get you your docs on time.
Perfect. I've got one more question, and then we'll need to close our program as our time is running out today. Lisa, do you require a set number of documents to be reviewed per day?
We don't per person. There's always gee, I hope you get through this many. We have a screen in our review room that shows the average pace that they're going at that point, and it flips to how many documents are left, what percentage. It has a lot of statistics that it just keeps flipping through, so the reviewers can always see what the pace is. But because our reviewers are salaried and they don't there's no overtime, if they don't get through enough documents, between the hours of 8 and 5, they may be there till 7 or 8 getting them done. So there's always that little incentive to get them done. But at the same time, we completely recognize that, if they've got an entire batch of huge spreadsheets for the day, they may only get through a couple hundred. If they've got a whole lot of really small emails for the day, they might get through 1,000 with no problem. And it really depends on what we know that we've batched out to them. A lot of times we'll try and keep those things batched together. I'll try and keep the big spreadsheets together just so that I can give them to somebody and know that their speed is basically going to be rotten for the day. But there's an excuse for it, and we make those kind of notes when we do pull the statistics and stuff. We do pull the types of documents that they reviewed for the day, so that we can see whether or not they had an inordinate amount of big PowerPoints or Excels. But as far as a specific, you have to get through 400 today, not usually.
Marvelous. I would like to thank our audience today for their valuable time in attending our Knowledge Leadership webinar today on a review of document review. Our next program is scheduled for August the 29th, which will focus on governance's role in preservation and hold. And on September the 19th, we'll be back with the legal ethics of legal hold, which will be presented by Brian Schrader. And we look forward to seeing you at that program, and thank you for attending. As you leave today, I would like to ask you to fill out the brief survey so that we can continue to improve our educational programs and the services that we provide to the community. And finally, I'd like to thank the speakers for your time today and giving us wonderful tips about managed review services. Thank you, Barry, Lisa, and Colin, and thank you again to those who attended our webinar. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.